Hello and welcome to CT Pages. My name is Kim. I am the Children and Young Adult Consultant with the Connecticut State Library. And I am here with reps from Berlin-Peck, Anne and Kim. Kim and Kim, that's great. They are here to tell us about an initiative that they started at their library known as Courageous Conversations. I'm ready to hear with everything happening in library worlds right now and in library life and regular life. I'm sure there's many a courageous conversation to be had in every community. So thank y'all for being here and tell me all about it.
Thank you for having us.
Yes, thank you so much. We're so excited to be talking about this today. This program began, well, the idea began back in December of 2020 during the pandemic. And I grabbed a book to read off of our shelves that I had seen quite a bit. It's written by the women who host Pantsuit Politics. It's called I Think You're Wrong, But I'm Listening. And it had grabbed my eye because probably like a lot of us, I have friends and family members that think differently about politics and social issues than I do. And a lot of times we just avoided talking about things because we didn't want to get into a fight. So I was drawn to this book because I wanted to be able to have these conversations with people. And the book is amazing, it's insightful, and I wanted to share it not only with friends and family, but immediately I thought about how can I bring this to our library, because I know our patrons feel the same way. I know that they want to be able to do this too. So of course it was the pandemic, and my first response was, we have to do this in person. We have to let people talk face to face. And then my second thought was, I don't think I can do this. I was really very hesitant. You know, I don't have a background in political policy or anything like that. I wasn't sure, like, what would I do if I got this group of people together and people started fighting, and how would I handle that? So I really just let the idea sit for a while. So about 6 months later, Kim came in and joined our staff as our director, and she called us all in for one-on-ones to have some conversations with us to find out about us. What do we do in the library? What ideas did we have? And so in the course of that conversation, I shared this idea with Kim.
She did, and I was super excited to hear her mention that, because I had worked for years in Washington State, and I want to say maybe in 2016, I was actually trained as a facilitator doing community conversations. So I had experience doing this. I enjoyed being a part of that process and facilitating those programs. And I also feel really strongly that libraries are the community living room. So we are the perfect spot to have these hard conversations or talk about the things that people maybe don't have a place to talk about with others. For example, if their families, you know, don't share the same ideas, or they don't have a format. So the library is a perfect spot for these conversations. And I was delighted to hear that Anne wanted to do something like this.
So right after that, we got started with some planning. And so I went to my department head and talked to her about it. She loved the idea. She immediately sent me a lot of resources so that I could start researching and figuring out how to do this. So the whole fall of 2021, I spent reading, watching webinars, researching, and that research led me to a number of really important conclusions. So the first of that was that it was going to be really important that we set conversation guidelines and that we make those very clear to everybody who came. This is how this is going to happen. This is how we're going to approach one another. This is how we're going to listen to one another. So we pulled ideas from a bunch of different sources. Other libraries and groups that have done this had published their conversation guidelines and really worked through them to decide what we wanted ours to be. So if you'll give me just a minute, I want to share those.
And while you're doing that, I've also had some facilitator training, like you, Kim, and yeah, like the agreements, right? The things that everyone, sort of step up or step back, or because I'm in youth services, like don't yuck my yum, which means, if someone likes something, you don't sort of put it down. Those are every good situation where you're hoping to have robust conversation that remains that remains a conversation as opposed to something adversarial, 100% necessary. I think this is great.
Sure. And I think these are really important things to discuss and hash out before you have a program like this. And there are lots of resources out there where you can get ideas and learn more about what should be included in these conversation agreements. So, for example, in my past, I used National Issues Forum from the Kettering Foundation. That's a great resource for topics and for developing your conversation agreement. ALA Libraries Transform is another resource, the Better Arguments Project, and surprisingly, we found good information from the Vermont Historical Society. They had done some programs and they had some sample conversation agreements online.
So these are the agreements that we came up with to use with our program. Engage to understand. The goal in dialogue is to understand others more fully and to build community. Come with an open mind and a willingness to hear others' experiences and opinions. It is not our goal to reach an agreement, and that's okay. And actually, that last sentence was one that was very important to us because we really wanted to get across that it's okay however the conversation goes. We don't have to reach a goal. The goal is just to talk. Listen to learn. Devote your full attention to the speaker, set judgment aside, don't interrupt, and truly listen to what they're saying rather than thinking of how you want to respond. Look for areas of agreement or shared values. You may be surprised how much you have in common. And this idea of shared values is one that came across a lot in the I Think You're Wrong, But I'm Listening book. And we've used that a lot and referred back to that idea of values in our conversations.
I just want to make a quick comment. I think this one in particular is a good reminder that often when we are listening to someone, we don't even realize that we are already forming our own, rebuttal or thoughts about this, or this is right or this is wrong. And this is a really good opportunity to just sit with what other people are saying and give yourself some space before you come up with what you want to say back.
So the third one, embrace vulnerability and speak your truth, really speaks to what I felt immediately in that we have a fear of vulnerability. We all feel that. And especially when we're sharing personal opinions that other people may not accept or like. So we wanted to express that. We also wanted people to know that it's important to share what's important to them, to speak from their own experience, and to appreciate others who are doing the same thing, and to know that that's a hard thing for all of us. And then finally, we acknowledge that there's more than one answer to anything that we talk about and any problem. But even though we disagree in our own opinions, we can do that while still recognizing that other people have intrinsic worth and value. And a part of that is also asking questions of others to learn about alternate points of view, experiences, and cultures. So these are our agreements that we created and have been using each time that we've had a meeting. So give me just a second. I'm going to stop sharing this. So the second conclusion that I learned or made from my research was that we also needed to give our participants some shared background knowledge. A lot of times when you talk about a divisive political issue, people come at it with misinformation or partial understanding of a topic, or, just a lack of understanding. They've heard one sound bite and that's what they go with. So we wanted to make sure that we provided some kind of background information before each conversation. We also realized that having a balanced source for that background information would be very, very important. We'd have to make sure that we picked articles or podcasts or other resources very carefully so that, first of all, we wouldn't turn people off before we even got going, and also that it would help people to acknowledge the multiple sides of an issue. And as Kim mentioned, that National Issues Forum has been a really great resource for several of our conversations, and we've used that a lot.
And not only do they provide resources for how to structure your conversation, but they also do provide the guides that you can download and share with participants. So they can be a good place to get your resources for your conversation.
Another conclusion that my research led me to was that it would be really helpful and important to have more than one of us in the room, and especially to have one person there to serve as a note taker. So Kim has been that note taker for all of our programs, and she listens to the conversation. I serve more as the moderator, guiding as needed, asking kind of pointed questions or helping people follow up on something that they've said and want to elaborate on. And then after the conversation, we send those notes out to all our participants so that they can have them and review what we've talked about. Then the next thing I realized was that rather than just jumping into conversations, I wanted to give our patrons the same kind of experience lead-in that I had had. So I wanted to start it with a book discussion. And I definitely wanted to share this one because I had had such a strong reaction to it. But it is written from a Christian perspective, and I was concerned that that would turn some people off. So I wanted to offer an alternative. And we had this book called Beyond Your Bubble by Tanya Israel. It is written from a very neutral perspective by a professor with a PhD in counseling psychology. And this one is really kind of prescriptive in that it's takes the roles of two people having a conversation. It has sample conversations in it. It has specific strategies that you can employ. So what we did was we offered everyone a choice that they could read one or both of the books. And whatever they had read, they could bring to our conversation and we would just share. And that would be the beginning of how we learned to have these conversations. And so with the exception of our very first meeting, which we felt we could do hybrid. So at the time when we started, which was January of 22, yes, January of this year, we were still doing most things online. And but we were going to try this when we were going to have a small number of people in person and have people able to access online. As it turned out, that day we had a big snowstorm and we had to close the library. So we moved the whole thing online and it actually worked great. We had a really great conversation with more than 20 people and people were, I think, pretty jazzed about it. It was, you know, they wanted more, they wanted to know what was next. And so from then we wanted to shift to that in-person conversation goal, which was my initial feeling of how it should be. So February through May, right? February through May, we've had 4 more conversations. They have all been in person. They have been small group because that was also something that we felt was important. We wanted people to know each other's names, to be able to, you know, look into each other's faces, that kind of thing. And so the last big conclusion is that we wanted to also choose the topics very carefully, especially at the beginning. So we picked topics that we felt would be a little less divisive than some others. We started with healthcare. We figured, you know, everyone has to interact with the healthcare system. We all have our own experiences with that. We all have our own opinions about that. So that was our first conversation. Our second conversation, we talked about social safety nets. And a lot of that actually focused on just the current welfare system, which I didn't know much about at all. I learned a ton in researching, and we found that most of our patrons didn't know a lot about it either. And then from there on, we turned up the heat a little bit and we went into gun policy. And then our final topic for this little session has been voting and elections. So as far as getting the program running, we really didn't have to fund it at all. We did it just like we would do any other like discussion or meeting program because we were running things. The resources that we used were either books that we could get through the consortium or articles that we were able to get for free online and be able to share them. And advertising was also pretty simple. We did our typical advertising, which included a press release to our local paper, and that actually led to a reporter from the New Britain Herald, just one town over, contacting us and writing an article on the program. So we did get a lot of interest that way, and I think that spread the word. So definitely outside of Berlin, and we do always get people from outside of Berlin coming to programs, but that helped spread that word around. So as far as how everyone has responded to the program so far and how things have gone, as I mentioned, we had that first program, we had a lot of excitement, and we really feel that the more of these programs that we've done, the better they've gotten. I feel like I've definitely gotten better at running it. Our patrons have gotten better at having those conversations. And, it's been interesting because when I first shared this idea with staff, everybody that talked to me was like, "Oh, you're so brave." And while I felt that, I also felt empowered by the research that I'd done and the preparation and the support that we have here and the way we support one another. So it's been really a wonderful experience. I would like to talk about, so I mentioned that, as we've gone on, the conversations have gotten better and better. We got to our policy or our conversation on gun policy. And we had a patron that had come to every single meeting. He was very vocal, very engaged, had always done his research, and was also on the liberal side of things, mostly in our conversation. But he was also a gun owner. And so he brought his perspective to that conversation. And I think it was fantastic. We had other people in the group that had very different opinions, but also hadn't had one-on-one experience with like being a gun owner. And, we talked about how 60% of gun violence is suicide. And one patron actually said, well, people are going to kill themselves. That doesn't matter to me. Like, we can't do anything about that. And, we were making the same kind of face that you are, which is like, oh, wow. And one of the other patrons in the group piped right up and said, I don't agree with that. I feel like life is important and we need to do what we can to take care of one another. So that was really, I think, energizing to see them starting to have those respectful disagreements. And then when we got to our next program on voting and elections, the moment we started, one of our patrons brought something up that we weren't surprised about.
Yeah. So, as Anne mentioned, when these things started, they were, I would say warm, right? But this particular conversation started off hot. So the first comment was, it's all the Republicans' fault. That's why we're in this situation. And I was like, oh no, here we go. On the one hand, this is what we've wanted, right? But it can be intimidating to put on these kinds of programs and scary because we live in a divided society. So it's hard to know what kind of response you're going to get from people or how they're going to respond to the topics that you select. So, I had to remember, and I think Anne probably as well, that our job is to keep the conversation going and to ask questions to get people talking. And when it does get off track in any way, we have to focus on, redirecting if necessary, and, making sure that everyone has an opportunity to be heard. And I would also add that I think this has been a real gift, because we all come to these topics with our own biases and our own ideas. And it's been a real gift to be able to see, maybe something that you think looks a certain way, but it doesn't necessarily look that way in real life, or that comment, it doesn't come from who you expect it to come from. And it's also been so great to get a deep dive into these topics that we maybe don't know a lot about to begin with.
So after we started with that hot comment, and the moment that that person said what he said, there was a woman across the circle, and she was getting amped up, and you could tell. And
I actually think she said, "I'm a Republican. I don't think that."
Yes.
So yeah.
Yes.
Off to the races.
So there was a little back and forth, and then the patron that had started things off, he said, "Hey," and he looked right at her and he said, "Hey, I know that we don't agree, but I'm happy to be sitting here talking to you about this. And I hope you're happy to be sitting here talking to me about it too." And she said, "Yes, I'm happy to be here." And so, that we just had that little heartwarm of, oh, yay, this is what we're here for.
That's why we're doing this.
This is the reason. So we have, as I mentioned, had a really great response from patrons. We've had a number of them, as I mentioned, coming to almost all of them or coming back over and over again. And they've told us over and over that they want more. They want it more frequently. What they really told us was that they wanted to practice one-on-one. And that they told us from the beginning. So we had already planned out how things were going to go for these first few months, but we started thinking about, okay, how can we do this? How can we set up a one-on-one? So in August, while we're taking a little summer hiatus on our bigger conversations, we are arranging one-on-one conversations. We're going to have the opportunity for them to sign up in time slots, give some preference for things that they want to talk about out of a list of, I think about 12 topics we gave them. And they'll be able to pick the ones they want to talk about. And hopefully, with some feedback, we'll be able to match them up with somebody who's on the opposite side from them. Kim and I will serve as moderators for those one-on-ones to help them as they go through their conversations. So we're really excited about that, and we're hoping that we get a good response. And then next steps in the fall, we're going to kick off conversations one more time and take it as long as we have people who want to continue to take it. We've been looking into bringing in some community partnerships. Specifically, our local police chief has approached us. And so we're thinking that's a great opportunity. We're really hoping that that works out to bring him in on some conversations, because I think that that would spark some great discussions in some of our topics as we go forward. Yeah.
Oh boy, wow. I'm trying to my brain is all over the place. The first thing I was going to ask you was if you're doing them again, but you've taken that question from me. So that's good. I was going to ask if anything had ever gotten kind of heated. I assumed it had to have, but it seems like you put a lot of thought into this. I think one of my questions is, I'm trying to sort of think of the way to ask it. Is this something that you sort of maybe what words and what suggestions would you have for someone who wants to do something similar to this? And it's just sort of a little bit of the caveat and background to that is, with some of these conversations, right, are these things that you were already kind of interested in, right? So you said, Anne, that you'd picked up a book and you had read it, and you've mentioned a podcast that you've listened to. So it seems like some of these for lack of a better word in the moment, like tough topic conversations are already things that you're kind of interested in seeking information out. This isn't something that was sort of dreamt up in the 9 to 5 timeframe and then researched in the 9 to 5. Like this bleeds into your real life because you have a genuine interest. Do you think that, and the same with you, Kim, you know, like you already had facilitator training, like there's some, you need to be facilitating something, right? So it seems like this is something that y'all have sort of a vested personal interest in, library or non-library. Do you think that that is necessary for people who want to do this work in their communities, right? To have some sort of vested interest in these conversations, or do you think this is something that can kind of be dreamt up, you know, sort of within library meeting confines and researched and executed in a good way? Does that make sense?
Yes, absolutely.
So I'll start if that's
Sure.
okay with you. I don't think that people need to have a vested interest in like doing conversations. I don't think people need to be afraid that they've never done this before. I think what they do need to be interested in is the library as a public forum and a place where people can have these conversations. If someone has never done this before, I would suggest using National Issues Forum, because they really do provide you with guidelines, how to do the conversation. Even they provide you with the materials that you would need to provide to your patrons in order to, you know, get information to come have the conversation. Another option is, I think it's called World Cafe. I don't know if any of you have heard of that one, but that's another kind of packaged, already gives you everything you need to do this. I think you just need to have a desire to want to be that place where people can have these conversations. And I'll also add that it doesn't have to be like a big, scary topic. It could be a community topic or something that people in your area are talking about. You know, maybe there's a new community center that a town wants to do, or, you know, maybe people have questions about like, wow, I really think that there should be a stoplight at this corner. Like, it doesn't have to be a big thing. It can be something more local to get you started.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And of course, I feel that anytime we bring things that are personally important to us to our job life, we bring an extra layer of importance and excitement, I think. But you don't need to have anything. And as I mentioned, I didn't have any policy background. I, you know, just as we all do, use the experiences that I've had personally and thought about, well, how can I apply it to what I'm doing here? And so I think the hardest thing is really just getting over the fear and the hesitation. And for that, I would say, you know, get a partner, because if you've got a partner in there with you, first of all, a lot of that hesitation of what's going to happen, like what happens if XYZ happens, you've got somebody there to back you up. And that's very, very helpful. And having other people on the staff that are on board and behind you and willing to help is also very important.
Yeah.
The
And,
phone a
you know,
friend philosophy. I love it.
It's certainly nice to have, you know, notes afterwards or a note taker, but that's not a requirement. I think it is important to have two people. Like, you just need that, you know, moral support and the crowd control, because you can do it as a team.
Mm-hmm. And I can't tell you how many times Kim and I have sat down and hashed through even just, how do we title this? Like our gun policy, like, what do we call this? And we even gave that one a guiding question, because we wanted to really focus the conversation and make sure that off the bat, we didn't get off onto something really wonky and kind of crazy.
Mm-hmm. And one thing I'll add is that I don't think anybody has to do this by themselves. We've done this. I think Avon Library was doing something around facilitating conversations. So other libraries have come before you. Don't be afraid to reach out and ask questions. I love talking about this topic and talking about, you know, our experience doing this, and I'm happy to share it with anyone else who's interested.
Exactly why we do CT pages, so that we can share initiatives and programs like this so that other people are aware, right? And they do have a real person to reach out to, like a real phone number to call or a real email, to sort of type into their inbox. So that's fantastic. I'm loving this. So I have a question. So you said that these were really well attended, which is so amazing to hear. I know, like when I was front staff, like my biggest fear before I even got to like, oh my gosh, what's going to happen? My first year was almost like, is anybody going to show up? Is it going to be me and like two people sort of like staring at each other? So I don't know a whole lot about the breakdown of Berlin-Peck, although you have said that there are other people from neighboring communities that have come to your program. So are these like multi-generation conversations, or they're like some Gen Xers and millennials and, some baby boomers in there. And I also don't know a whole lot about the economic breakdown. And this might have come up in conversations, but are we talking about different people from different economic breakdowns? Because I can imagine that conversations where multiple people from different backgrounds, different walks of life, different experiences are really going to change the type of conversation that's had in a room. So I'm wondering, do you have any insight on that with regards to attendance? I understand keeping a small group, so it seems like numbers don't really matter as much here because you want to keep it small, but I would think the makeup might make a difference in your conversations.
Yes. And in some sense, there's very little way that you can control that. And we've certainly discovered that. Our first two conversations, especially our first one on healthcare, we got to the end of the conversation and people looked around the circle and went, I think we all agree. And I mean, we had a great conversation. We talked a lot about issues, but it was like, oh, well, what do we do here?
Sure. One thing I'll say about that conversation in particular, I feel like in terms of the demographic, most of the people were around the same age. I would say mostly retired people. Mm-hmm. And I think that generally happens because they have more time, right? They have more time to read, to come to a program. But in this case, some people had traveled to other countries and spent extensive time in other countries and were able to speak to how they have their healthcare structured in, say, France. So it really did add some depth to our conversation that we didn't necessarily bring to the table.
Mm-hmm. And I would say that's been true of every conversation. I feel like the demographics maybe haven't mattered as much. Although I would love to see like a huge swath of ages and experiences and all that. But even when you have, say, mostly retired people in the room, they still have such varied experiences and such varied opinions that you can end up with a really lively conversation.
Awesome. That sounds so great. And I'm trying to think, so is this something that primarily the two of you do? Do you bring in other folks or do other staff members kind of get involved in this? I know one of the big barriers to a lot of great programming, or something that we hear from other librarians, are like, time and staffing. So is this something that y'all are able to uphold with sort of the staffing situation at your own library? Do you run into any issues there at all?
I think it's been the two of us so far. And the biggest barrier is just being flexible. I mean, you know what, sometimes you might have to work an extra Saturday or work an extra evening, right, to be able to accommodate these programs. But for the most part, I think we can do this, the two of us, for right now. And it hasn't become an issue in terms of having the time to gather our resources and do our research. Do you have anything to add?
No, I would agree. And I think in terms of specific staffing, it's really all it's involved is just having one of our substitutes come in on the time when we run that program. So other than that, it's just been very easy to put together.
Yeah, I love that. Well, because that means that it's accessible, right? So if someone's at a smaller library with smaller staff, essentially, it's possible for someone to scale this to their community, if they feel that it's important and necessary for the area that it's in. So I really love that. Like, it doesn't take like a small army, right, of like, one of like the big multi-branch systems to pull something like this off. And I mean, I guess, so do you have any other thoughts on any other partners that you might bring in? I'm just really interested. I think having the police chief, I think that that's a fantastic idea. Again, another person who can bring a different perspective just from their job background and things like that. Do you have any other like groups or organizations that you're kind of keeping an eye on that you think you might sort of like nudge a little bit?
I have a meeting with social services in July. So that's definitely a group that I would like to work more with, and I think would be a good support for a program like this. We actually, and this is a little bit of an aside, but we worked with this group on a program that they were doing earlier this year, and we were one of the presenters, and we walked their group on walk through how to do conversation jars and come up with questions so they can have these conversations at home with their families and their teens.
I love that. I think you're off to a great start, I think. With
and I haven't even mentioned this to Anne yet, but one topic that's been on my mind is death and dying. I think we need to talk about it more, and that might make for an interesting conversation.
Absolutely.
So it's not necessarily like a society thing or, a divisive topic. I think it's something we need to talk about more.
Absolutely.
We don't at all. Yeah. It feels like it's one of those taboo topics. Even there's not a whole lot to quote unquote argue about, right? Or there's not sort of a divisive line. But it is sort of one of those taboo things, that you don't really talk about in polite conversation. So this is great. I mean, thank you guys so much for taking time out of your day to share this, not only with us at the State Library, but with the greater Connecticut community. I think this is exactly the type of thing that we want to share. Again, it's something scalable. It's something important. Kim, I loved your analogy about the library being, sort of the community living room. I personally agree 110%. And these are the types of conversations that we should be having, like in our living rooms and sort of trusted spaces. So thank you guys so much for sharing your time and your,
thank you for thinking of us.
Yes.
We're happy to do it.
Yeah, truly our pleasure.
Thank you so much.